life with, because that right there is such an important decision, because I knew guys that had, baby mamas that they couldn't stand. I'm like, I could just say it honestly, you know what I mean? And I'm sure the feeling was mutual. They couldn't stand them. But it affected the relationship with their children. And that's just something that I just did not want to be a part of. So I kind of knew what I didn't want. You know what I mean? I didn't know what everything it was going to take to be a father, but I knew what I didn't want.
Welcome back to another episode of Just My Baby Daddy Podcast. It's your boy AJ.
It's the bougie baby daddy Eli.
And who we have on the podcast today. So we could talk about him as a former NBA player. We could talk about him as a star at Syracuse. We could talk about him as an activist. But here's what I like about him is before the pandemic started, he was one of those parents that was, homeschool their kids. It's become a new thing now, but we have a professional athlete that was actually homeschooling his children. So this is the dad that we definitely want to talk to. We got Mr. Etan Thomas on the show. How you doing?
I'm blessed. How y'all doing?
Good.
Oh, we're hanging in there, man. And, one thing AJ and I talked about is the stuff that you do from, like you said, homeschooling to activist work. It's like, you epitomize some of the stuff that we wanted to get on the show, because your insight is going to be very, very helpful. And like I said, we really appreciate you. And AJ is going to get you started with how we start everybody else.
We're going to start you off the same way. What does it mean to you to be a father?
Oh, it means everything. Honestly, I really enjoy being a father. Like it's, I wrote a book called Fatherhood, Rising to the Ultimate Challenge, because that's really what it is. It's like the ultimate challenge, but it's the greatest, thing that you can get joy from. Me and my wife are blessed to have three, beautiful children, and one boy and two girls. And it's just been a whole learning process with each one. We're learning, as we go. And it's just, honestly, it's a blessing to be in their lives, to be able to be there present with them every single day, have them bounce things off of you, come to you with things that are going on in their little teenage world and stuff like that, and ask you that. Like that stuff is, it might seem small to some people, but when your daughter comes to you and she asks you a question about boys, or your son asks you a question about, I'm dealing with this, it's priceless.
Oh, wow. So when you look back over your fatherhood journey, like you said, it means everything. Did the idea of fatherhood immediately click in you, or did it take some growing within to kind of get you to that point where, like, this is what I have to do, this is how I want to do it? Like, what was that process for you?
So, I guess if I go back to childhood, my parents were divorced when I was younger. And so I guess I grew up in a, so-called broken home type thing. But I had a relationship with my father, saw him on visitations, which was once or twice a month. Mm-hmm. But a lot, would be missing from those visitations. You know what I mean? Like, so I didn't have him present with me every single day at home. So, I had went through the times of, being angry, of, wishing that my situation was different. I used to watch the Cosby Show and get jealous of Theo, because I was like, man, he don't really appreciate, Dr. Huxtable like he should, what I'm saying? Because he had him there every single day.
Yeah,
so
right.
I went through all of that. So then when I, got older, I knew what I wanted, and I knew how I wanted to be present in my children's lives every single day. And I wanted to, took time with making the decision of who you're going to spend your life with, because that right there is such an important decision, because I knew guys that had, baby mamas that they couldn't stand. I'm like, I could just say it honestly, what I mean? And I'm sure the feeling was mutual. They couldn't stand them. But it affected the relationship with their children. And that's just something that I just did not want to be a part of. So I kind of knew what I didn't want, You know what I mean? I didn't know what everything it was going to take to be a father, but I knew
Right.
what I didn't want. If
Right.
that
Wow.
makes sense.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I was just curious because every now and then people reference like fictional TV shows or things like that. And you said you visit, you've seen your father. Your father was in your life on visitation or whatever, and then like you said, you reference other things.
Mm-hmm.
But the process of learning, the process of who kind of instills some of the things that you wanted to do, what you didn't want to do, but
Mm-hmm.
who kind of helped guide you along that path, or was it just like something you just learned through trial and error, through experience? Like, how did that come about?
So I talked about it, in my book Fatherhood.
Hmm.
I talked about that of having mentors. My grandfather was a mentor. My AAU coach was a mentor. My AAU coach was also my pastor, Reverend MC Potter, and he was there's so much that you can do with youth sports. I mean, he was like a surrogate father for all of us, and it was like I learned so much from him just watching him with because his son was on the team. And it was interesting because it's funny that you asked me that because I just had a conversation with his son a few weeks ago. And I was saying, a lot of us was real jealous of you. And he was
Oh
like, why you
wow.
say that? I was like, because you had the father that we all wanted.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like we see, and then also sometimes we would see where it didn't seem like you appreciated it the way that you should have. So that we felt some kind of way about you. And he was
Right.
like, I heard that from a lot of guys. I was like, yeah, but you got to understand, it was normal for you to have your father there every single day. It wasn't
Hmm.
normal for everybody because we
Right.
didn't have that. You know what I mean? So
Right.
yeah, but learning the process of different men in the community, mentors like that. Like I said, my grandfather. That's what really built the foundation of what I wanted to become when it was my turn to be a father.
Oh wow. And so, what was the biggest thing for you to change within yourself to make you an effective father? Like when you do self reflection and self inventory, and we all should do that. I mean, but what is it within yourself that was the biggest thing that you had to adjust?
Oh, it was a lot. So it was funny. So after I wrote my book, I started the fatherhood movement, and I became part of Obama's President
Hmm.
Obama at the time fatherhood initiative and My Brother's Keeper. So I was doing these panels and stuff all over the country, and a lot of that I was learning, listening. I'm doing the panels and stuff like that, but I'm also learning. You know what I
Yep.
mean? I'm hearing
Yep.
different people's perspectives and everything like that. And one of the things that kept coming up was that each child is different. So what works with one child, you're gonna have to have a whole new game plan with the next child, like a whole new one.
Right.
And I really saw that. So Malcolm, my son, was my first, and then Imani came after that, and I had to start all over. Like you know what I'm saying? Like it was completely different. But
For
again, those are
sure.
the things that it's a great joy to take those roller coasters and those learning experiences. But you also have to be humble enough to know that you don't know, if that makes sense. So
That
you
makes
have to
sense.
find out what works with each specific child better. And, that's a process where you have to listen more, as much as you tell them to do this, do this, do this. You have to pay
Yep.
attention to them. And also, generations change because when I was growing up, my family were Caribbean. So there was no talking. We didn't have no voice. We didn't have no, that didn't even exist. You know what I mean? But times
Right.
is different now. So now I'm listening to my daughter. I'm like, okay, well, why did you do that? Explain to me why you did that. Explain to me your thought process, and then let's go from there. And then a whole different new connection happened after that. You know what I mean? Now, of course,
Yeah.
like my mom and my grandma, they're like, we ain't having no conversation with no 6-year old.
Child.
You know what I
No
mean?
child.
And I get it, but that for me, learning that was a huge process, and it was really beneficial as the kids got older.
Oh man, that's super dope. It's funny that you said that about the talking, the
Yeah,
communication. That generational thing
yeah,
is real.
yeah.
No matter, because like you were hitting on, man, talking and listening, and the humility that it takes to understand that we don't know it all.
Right.
That's tough.
Yeah.
All right. So you said youth sports coach was big for you, right? And here's a question that I really, really want to ask you, because your son is now well, all of your kids are involved in youth sports,
Mm-hmm.
but your son's in high school,
Right.
and you are a very known personality. And the things that you speak about, a lot of people that you speak about, that demographic, those kids' parents are there, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does that feel walking into a room where these kids' parents are the ones that you're talking about now? Your son is around these kids, and how does that happen? How does that work?
So my son, he's okay debating, and he likes it, and he likes to challenge his teacher. And the
Oh,
teachers are, it's like a different generation. You know what I mean? So they're not
Yeah.
go to the principal's office type of thing. They allow them to go back and forth and question different things that are going on. And he's been that kid since he was little. We homeschooled the whole time until they get up to high school.
Mhm.
So in high school, we send them on to high school, but for middle school, elementary, it's all homeschool for all three of our children. And so we encourage them to chew your food before you swallow it. You know what I mean? Like if you get told something, process it first. And if you have questions, ask, no matter who is the person telling you. So whether it's our pastor at church, if you hear a sermon and you're like, I got a question about this, ask. You know what I mean? If we teach you something and you have a question. So that's the type of mentality that he has. So going into school, talking about different topics, he's been the center of a lot of different debates, and he doesn't have a problem challenging people on their conventional thought on a certain topic. And so I'm glad that he does have that in him, because if he didn't, I say a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? I write a lot of stuff, like you said. But he doesn't have that problem, so that just worked out that way. And my daughters definitely don't. Right, my daughters are so fire, especially the little one. It's always the little one that be like the firecracker. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah,
We say that all the time because my son has we say my son just has too much mouth because he questions every single thing.
right.
But from a parenting perspective,
Mm-hmm.
what I find is that it's a fine line between seeking knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and just running your mouth.
Oh yeah, no, it definitely is. It definitely is.
So I'm still trying to find that balance with my son because he will question me to death.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to something you were talking about when you was talking about the active. How did you get involved into activism and pushing the fatherhood objective, and how does that correlate to what you instill into your children?
So as far as the activism, I've been involved in that. It's people that know me like from middle school, high school. They're like, "Oh, he always been like that." You know what I mean? He just do it on a bigger
Right.
level now. That's what
Right.
they all say, and it's really the truth. And so, like when I'm writing my books, I've written a lot of different books, and but so say my last two. One is called "We Matter: Athletes and Activism," and the next one is called "Police Brutality and White Supremacy: The Fight Against American Traditions." So in my book, I'm always telling stories about my children. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
always saying this happened. Trayvon
Mhm.
Martin happened, and then I had this conversation with my son. You know what I
Right.
mean? Sandra Bland happened, and then my daughter asked me this question, and we're going there, and that kind of forms why it's so important to me, because these are conversations that we're always having in the house and having the talk. So I'll go on, MSNBC or something like that, and talk about the talk, especially the summer of 2020 after
Mm-hmm.
George Floyd happened, and everybody wanted to
Mhm.
discuss. They're like, "Oh, racism exists. Oh, police brutality is an issue." We're like, it's been an issue for a long time, but all right, that's
Long
cool.
time.
We can talk about
Exactly.
it now. So I was getting invited to a whole lot of different things, and I kept talking to a lot of the mainstream audience, so mostly a white audience, about the talk that Black parents have to have with our children every single time one of these incidents happen. And we have to check in with them. Okay, do you know what you're supposed to do? If you get stopped by the police, you can't make no sudden movements. You have to keep your hands visible. You can't do, you know what I mean? And stuff like that. And that's not the norm for a lot of white America. They don't have to worry about that. I mean, it's just not their reality. And so talking to them about that, puts into perspective that there really are two different Americas for different people. And it's regular for us. I mean, my mother had to talk with me when I was younger. My grandmother had it. That was just stuff that happened. So it's like regular, but for them it's not. So I incorporate that in all of my writings, talking about my children and, especially different conversations that I've had with them. That's what really shapes a lot of my writings.
But that's interesting. So, because we've talked about generations, the difference between generations. Now, when it comes to some of the stuff that you talk about, that you try to talk about with your children, with it being a difference in generation, have you received any pushback from anything that you may see or feel or think from your children?
No, I always provide examples to them, and like let them know like this, like I'm a real person. So like my kids, it is so funny. So my mother was a school teacher, right?
Okay.
And so whenever your mother's a school teacher in the summer, you just always have extra school to do. That's the way that it works. You know what I mean? Whether it's writing, reading of extra books, book reporting, that's just how it works. Well, with homeschooling, I found myself doing the same thing with my kids. So they have a question. I was like, "Oh, I got the perfect book for you. Read this book and give me a 3-page paper about it." And I'm answering their question or what they have an issue with or what they're, in the book. And then they get it. And it's a great thing when you can do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
but
you're armed with knowledge.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was like, no, you don't have to take my word for it. Read this. You know what I mean? And you'll see. And they see it all broken down, especially my middle daughter, Imani. Like, she really is somebody who you really, she's not she never was a because I said so person and just accept it. That just wasn't her, even from the, out the womb.
Right.
You know what I mean? That just wasn't her personality. So, breaking stuff down to her and showing her different stuff. Here, read this article. And then come back to me and we'll talk about it. She's like, oh, understand perfectly. I don't even need to ask no more questions. You know what I mean? You made your point. So
now, that's interesting because when you're able to back what you're saying up with actual fact, it makes the conversation smoother and it actually teaches something.
Definitely.
But throughout all these conversations and that punishment of having to do book reports over the summer, what have you learned that you didn't actually quite get from them when you were having these discussions? Or that might have opened up a different frame of thought or frame of reference or point of view from.
Well, they're a whole different generation. So the way that they think is different. I mean, I'll sit down and listen to some of their music and we'll break down different. It is so crazy. I find myself doing things that my mother did with me. You know what I mean? I remember when my mom, she first, I'm sitting there, I'm in the house, NWA, that first album first came out. I'm playing it. I don't think nobody's home. I'm sitting there. Yeah, look, right? And she come in. I was like, oh, I didn't know you was home. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
All right, we're gonna sit down and listen to this whole album, and then we're gonna talk about it. And so we listened to it, and she broke down different things that were going on in the album, like broke it down piece by piece. I remember we did that with Public Enemy. I remember we did that with X-Clan. You know what I mean? Just broke it down. So I'll do that with them. And I'll listen to their music. Okay, let me throw on this NBA Youngboy and let's hear what he's talking about. And so we're talking about, I'm like, okay, all right.
You got to translate.
Right, so what do you think about, you know what I mean? Especially with my daughters. Like, I'm listening to, you know what I mean? Everything. I'm like, Cardi B, like, who else? Okay, all right, let's talk about this. All right. So girls that have that kind of mentality, how do you think that ends up, for them working out in the long run?
Right.
And I'm just, we breaking stuff down and have real examples. And I always tell, me and my boys laugh. It was like, when you have kids, sometimes you get kind of like Heathcliff Huxtable, where you tell stories all the time. Yeah. And so I'll tell stories from when I grew up about something that pertains to something. You know what I mean? And it just fits. Like, oh, I knew this girl one time, and she did that. You know what I mean? And I'm talking, and it's referencing, what I'm listening to, and that makes my point. So I do that.
That's if your kids. That's only worse if your kids like you, because I do that stuff with my kids. And my kids just swear to God, I'm just so old and don't know what I'm talking about. It was like Darnell Jones or some song was coming on, and I was telling my son, I was like, "Yeah, you talk to the girl like this." He said, "Dad, that won't work. Dad, this doesn't work. You're old, Dad." I'm like, "Come on,
that's funny." You know what cracks me up is when they think something's new, and I'm like, that ain't new. Let me show you the original song where they got that beat from, And then
Yep.
even some of the lyrics, they're like, oh, they took the whole beat. I was like, yes, they took the
All the
whole
time.
song.
It
All the
does.
time.
It's still no matter how you look at it, though, it still will make you feel old. And I'm like,
They
come
do.
on, man, this coming back around.
I
When
know
I
it.
when I look back at like people that I felt like I was watching growing up and realizing they're only a couple years behind me or whatever, I'm like, yo,
Ain't
I
that crazy?
damn might be old.
Ain't that crazy?
Mhm.
No, that's pretty cool.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
where we were too. I mean, Puffy, all he did was sample our parents' stuff,
that's
and
all
we
he did.
and we
Yeah,
had like it was brand new. So I mean,
right. And I
that's the
went
way
through
it
that.
was.
And my mom was
Hmm.
like, that ain't new. And I, especially with Ice Cube, I remember when he kept
Mm.
sampling all the Funkadelics and all that different stuff. I
Yeah.
remember she was like, that's old. We had that. Let me show you the original. I was like,
Oh
dang, that
wow.
is the whole song.
So when you look at when you were talking about earlier when you was talking about having to basically individualize parenting based
Mhm.
on the personality of your children.
Mhm.
A lot of men from our conversations and just talking to people admit that the communication piece is one of the hardest pieces. Then
Definitely.
it's the understanding of processing what they're saying.
Mhm.
Did you find challenge in trying to navigate your communication style with each one of your children?
Um, no. Sometimes I would give them stuff, kind of straight, no chaser type thing.
Mm.
Like I'd be honest with them. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like brutally honest with them. And I think sometimes it's received better because they're exposed to so much now. And every generation says that, but really with social media and stuff they
Yeah.
can look up on the internet, they exposed to everything young. So you got to just tell them honest. You know what I mean? It's not like sheltering them from stuff. No, my kids don't look at that, or my kids don't. No, they've seen everything. If not in your house, then if they're from their friends at school or their
Right.
teammates or
Right.
something.
Right.
And I always tell parents, I was like, if you ever see like a whole lot of kids gather around a phone, it's usually nothing good that they're looking at. You know what
No, never. Never.
But that's just honest, you know what I mean? But it's just it's a different generation. So with that communication, the squeamish parent, the squeamish father that don't want to have the conversation with their daughter, that got to be out the window now.
Right.
Like, you got to take a deep dive in early, because if not, then they're gonna get their advice from their homegirls.
And that's
You
not
know
gonna be
what I mean?
good.
And that's not what you want. Or
No.
somebody who they listen to, like Cardi B. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, you don't want them getting no advice. I'm not picking on Cardi B just by
No,
herself.
I know.
Hey.
Everything should be in context. I get
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
But back to that. Now that your kids are now going from homeschool and they're in school, how do you not necessarily protect from that, but how was it that you get them to that adjustment? Like, hey, everything we did here, this builds you. No matter what they tell you in this building, this is who you are. That's a part of this, but this foundation of who you are has already been built. So don't let these outside influences come to you. How do you avoid that from happening?
I mean, you just have to keep drilling it into them. It's interesting when I passed by my daughter's room one time. I ain't gonna say I was eavesdropping, but every now and then I'll, you know what I
Oh,
mean?
you were being nosy. It's
Get
okay.
there and see what they're talking about. And so, it is funny when you hear your daughter saying something to one of her friends, almost verbatim what you told them, and giving them advice. But it's like literally like she was taking notes, because sometimes, especially with daughters, you don't know if they're really listening.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like you're talking and talking. She's like, all right, are they paying attention here? But then to see them, like, repeat what you said as advice to one of their peers. Like, she was listening, you know what I mean? And you just got to keep talking to them. That's it. It's not like it's a formula like, your kids, if you do this and you do this, then your kids are not going to, it's not like that. You just got to keep talking to them, even when they do leave you, even when they do go out and are exposed to different things. That communication has to always be open. I was watching this show, and because I like to watch the popular shows that are happening with young people, right?
Mm.
So there was this show, and I was not ready for it. but I kept hearing about this show, and I was like, Zendaya was in it, and it was
I knew what
You
show.
talking
I knew
about
exactly what show.
you know what I'm talking
Euphoria. I
about.
knew. Yeah, I knew.
So
yeah.
I
they
know.
said they said this show was the biggest viewed show past Game of Thrones. I was like, past Game of Thrones, really? I was like, all right, so let me check this out. I was not ready for what I saw when I turned it on. Right,
Wow.
but it's one of the highest. It's called. Dang, I almost got the name of it.
Oh, I know what it is.
Euphoria.
Euphoria.
Euphoria. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
so you know what I'm
Euphoria.
talking about. So, but what I saw, and I watched both seasons, watched the whole thing.
I couldn't get through it.
I made myself.
I
watch
could. It was too
I,
wild.
I made myself.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about it is, it was so uncomfortable, so disturbing, so everything. It's for any father watching that, they will be completely disturbed.
Yes.
But one of the common factors in each one of those young girls is they never had like a relationship or open communication with their fathers. Like they didn't. And I was just like, wow, look at that. You know what I mean? And even with the mothers, it was the communication was kind of shaky. But with the fathers, there was no communication, no anything like that. So they were like just kind of fending for themselves, or they put up that wall. So sometimes teenagers can put up the wall and everything's fine, Dad. And then that's it. Everything's fine. School was fine. Day was fine. Everything like that. And they have all this stuff going on that they don't share. So it's really like being able to break that wall. I recommended that movie for every father that I have spoken to. And I said, is going to be, just prepare yourself because it is a very difficult watch, but it will make you take a deeper dive, especially into your daughter's lives, watching that show. You know what I mean? So that would be my recommendation. Again, it's a tough watch, but I would recommend it.
It's extremely tough. I watched it too, though, but it's true. I mean, that's the reality of it. I didn't realize that until I moved out into the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
Like how much a reality that type of stuff is. Like I never heard of kids ODing in high school or stuff like when we hear about people in high school, like they'll get arrested or it's usually something related to violence. But out here, it's like all these kids going to rehab for drugs and pills, and it's like I didn't even know that was a real thing like that.
But like back in the day,
it was in our community.
Back in the day, I remember cats, get in trouble for weed. That was like the most.
Yeah.
But these cats, they're in there doing methamphetamines. They doing like, well, I'm like, goodness gracious, where y'all even get those drugs? You know what I mean? Like this.
Yeah. The cabinet from their parents' house because they don't care, they on vacation. That's where a lot of it happens.
And those pills, like you saw, like Zendaya's character, she was looking for any kind of pill, like any kind of anything, and it's tough.
So go back to because when I was asking about the communication with the different generations, and you were just talking about the communication with your daughter. That's what I wanted to get. So is your communication and how you communicate and what you communicate different between your son and your daughter?
No, I mean, and a lot of the times, and I talked about that in my book, this last book, Police Brutality and White Supremacy. We have the same conversations because it's the same type of threat. And, I had a whole chapter talking about specific situations where Black women were targets or victims of police brutality. And, where their attitude was weaponized.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that was used as the excuse of why the police officer was in fear for their life and then protected from qualified immunity, because of their actions. So it's the same kind of discussion. I remember we watched, what is the movie called? The Hate You Give. Y'all see that movie?
I haven't seen that one.
Great movie. I'd recommend that one too.
Hate You Give.
I recommend that one too. And it was interesting because when we were watching it, and I'm not going to spoil alert or anything like that, but we were watching. There was a scene where the guy, they were stopped by the police. And literally while they're watching, my daughters are like, no, he's doing that wrong. No, he can't do that. What is he doing? You know what I mean? Because they know you can't do that when you're stopped by the police. There's certain rules that Black children have to follow when they're stopped by the police. Now, they will see their white counterparts get away with all kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I was shocked when I went to Syracuse. that was really my first time seeing seeing anybody cuss out the police. I would see white kids, they on the fraternities and everything. I will have your badge, you motherfucker. I was like, are y'all serious?
Yeah.
And nothing happens. You know what I mean? But for us, we have different rules. We can't even roll our eyes at the police. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a totally different set of rules. But to answer your question, no, the conversation is definitely the same, and it has to be the same because they're in the same situation.
Makes sense.
I remember you talk about Syracuse, thinking of it because I went to Howard coming out of high school, but I lived not far from University of Maryland. So that year when Maryland won the championship, I was a freshman at Howard, but I drove up to University of Maryland, and just to see the way they were acting, the way the police just let them freely go, and I said, man, if we won, I don't care if Howard won March Madness. Let some shit try like that happen like that on Georgia Avenue. Everybody getting arrested. We can't even have fun the same way.
Right.
Like everything is just different. We're police different. And you got to know that. You got to know that. Like they'll come up and grab you and let your other friends go. That's just the way it is.
That's the way it is.
Wow. But from sometimes when I'm mentoring and talking to younger men, younger boys, it seems like they don't always get it that's a real thing because I guess the culture and the world has been so integrated via social media, and the access and the interpersonal relationships that we had to develop by actually having real conversations and in-face conversations and in-face interactions. But sometimes I was like, man, I get that. Nah, y'all tripping. It's not really like that until something happens on the news, until something is publicized, and then like, well, maybe it is real, but I'm still gonna move the way I want to move. But they don't realize, no, you have to adjust because your skin color doesn't change. I don't care if you're Sammy Sosa or Stephen A. Smith when he putting on too much makeup.
Right.
You still need to realize that this is your reality, but it's hard to sometimes convey that in an effective way to get these younger men and women to understand that, especially when you're in these predominantly, Black or brown or minority based communities. And so I'm just trying to figure out an effective way to kind of communicate that reality. So,
well, a lot of times what I do, because I've been speaking at schools, since I was like younger. Started that with my mom. When I went to college, my mom would have me come back and speak at her high school. I'm like, I'm just a little bit older than them. What am I gonna tell them? You know what I'm saying? But that's just what she had me do. So I was always doing that through college and through the pros. And what I would tell people, in that situation, I was like, look, you got to see look at the way that y'all are treated by your teachers, by your resource officers that are at your school or everything like that. And then just peek at how the suburb schools are treated. And how and they're the ones with all that high level drugs that we was talking about. Yeah, you know what I mean. Do their lockers get swept? You know what I mean, with the dog and come through? Do they have to walk through metal detectors like they're in prison? Do they have to do all? They don't have to do none of that, and they got all the drugs. You know what I'm saying? So it's just a matter of just breaking it down for them. You know what I mean? I was like, look, there've been infractions that they have, and nothing happens to them. They be trying to suspend y'all for anything. For anything, any little thing, they want to suspend y'all. You know what I mean? And then once they suspend you, the teachers be tripping about letting you make up the work. So then you get behind. Then when you don't have a good grade, you know what I'm saying? Then you're, and I just break the whole thing down to how it's all just a setup. So you might think that things are all regular and they're all cool and stuff like that, but they're not. You know what I mean? And then you're going to be given the same standardized tests that they're given over there, even though you got 30 kids in your class and they got 14 in the teacher's aide and everybody gets a laptop. Yep. You know what I'm saying? So just showing them. You got just being honest with them. This is what it is. This is the setup.
Dope.
Yeah.
So go ahead, AJ.
So what I was going to say is I think it's but we have to have those conversations, even if they're not listening, because if not, you're doing a disservice to them.
I agree.
Because what happens is what they're going to end up doing, the generation after us, they're going to have children too. So we can't have them out there just telling their kids like, hey, everything's going to be fine. Like, no, it's our job, like, to let them know, because they're going to be in our seat soon. You know what I mean? So you got to let them know the truth. The truth is we're not going to be treated the same. We're not going to be viewed the same. We got to deal with it, but you got to make sure your children and them know, so they walk out into this world, they prepared for it.
Right.
So I mean, that's about the best we could do, because it's not going to just change.
Right.
It's not going to just change at all.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. On a lighter note, though, one simple question: what was that first "I'm a father" moment for you?
The first I'm a father moment. I mean, I got it early. I'm gonna be honest with you. You know, like I'm sitting there, and my wife tells this story. I'm sitting there, and we doing the sonogram thing, and I hear the heartbeat. I was like, "That's the heartbeat already? That's the heartbeat this quick? It's only been a few weeks." I didn't know. That the heartbeat was that early. You know what I mean?
Oh, good.
I mean, it's not like something. That's not something you know what I mean. You don't learn that.
Yeah.
So
I was like, prepared for that.
That was my first moment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Touch on something real quick. When you bring up your wife a lot, what is her role, or what has she helped you with to become the best father that you could be?
Oh man, everything. I mean, from you know, and it's we balance each other. You know, it's like sometimes, you know, she tags me in, sometimes I tag her in. Sometimes I could say, you know, hey, you know what I'm saying? We could look at it this approach. You know what I mean? And she could do the same thing with me. We bounce things off of each other. We learn. She could tell me when I was wrong with something. I could tell her when she was wrong with something. Like literally everything. Like and that's why it's so important. You know, and I tell young men all the time, it's important to be very careful with who you choose, because you could have a wonderful experience, or you could have literally hell on earth. That is the spectrum. On this side is this, on that side it's hell on earth. And it you know, things change real quick when things go sour. And I, you know, it's I'm so blessed, you know, to be, you know, we're going to be coming up on our 20th anniversary here in another year, and it's such a blessing. You know what I mean? I can't even say it enough. But yeah, no, without when you hear guys say, well, I couldn't have made it at all without my wife, and people are like, well, what do you mean? You know what I mean? Why you say that? Was she in the gym shooting with you? Was she? You know, but people don't understand. Like, your wife balances you. Like, your wife supports you. Your wife, you know, can pull your coattail the way that nobody else can if you're going in the wrong direction. You know, I would watch these things. You know, I was just watching this show, and it was showing because Malcolm X's birthday was a while ago. And they were showing when Betty Shabazz was talking to him, and he was upset about something, and she was telling him, "Well, Malcolm, you know, you did this," and then he's listening to her like, "Yeah, you're right." You know what I mean? But there's certain things where the only person that can get through to you is your wife. You know, so it's things like that where, I mean, I could go on and on about it, but I tell guys all the time, be very careful. You have to choose wisely. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of examples of guys that did not choose wisely. A lot of examples. So just pay attention.
Well, speaking of that, so here's an example that I see a lot of lately is great NBA fathers. And that's something that, you know, growing up, didn't really, all you heard about was all the NBA dads, all they got is a bunch of kids. Everybody got a bunch of kids, a bunch of women, they all over the place. But you see now that people can control their own narrative, like you see like the Matt Barnes, you see Chris Paul, you see LeBron, and there's so many others. Like, speak to that about how that has changed, because I do remember a point in time where you think of NBA, you just think of they just got a bunch of kids, a bunch of baby mamas,
So,
a bunch of kids.
so I wrote about that in my book, Fatherhood.
Yep.
Because I was like, because they never showed any of that. They never showed
Yeah.
guys where after a game, we've been battling, and then we come back and our kids are playing with each other in the hallways, and our families are together, and we're like, what's going on? Like that, they don't ever show that part. You know what I
Right.
mean? They don't ever show guys like when they come out of the game, come out and they finish, they come out the locker room, and their kids run up to them and jump in their arms. That's regular every night. You know what I mean? But they never showed it. So one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to interview some guys who I would see that were great fathers and always with their kids. So I interviewed Grant Hill, interviewed, Allen Houston, interviewed Chris Paul, and had them just talk about, their children, because that was one aspect that you was never ever shown. So in one aspect, you really wasn't shown it with black men. But then with black athletes, it was, like you said, it was always skewed to one thing. And that, but now with social media, and we're not even talking about like a long time ago. We're talking about like just, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, but now with social media, guys can post their own family pictures. You know what I mean? Show themselves with their family. Show themselves a video of them, swimming in the pool with their kids or doing something regular. And people weren't ever able to see it. So I think it's great the direction that it went. But yeah, it wasn't like that for a very long time.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Right.
But you know what else? Go ahead, Eli. Well, one thing else is, back then it wasn't a lot of NBA players' sons making it to the league as well. So do you think the influx of, just that father presence is why you're starting to see more and more of these kids, or what is it? Because I remember before it used to be like, you think of an athlete, especially you think about the ones that made it, you come from the struggle, you do this, you do that. You know what I mean? That's always the narrative you hear. But now, what I mean? You can't tell me that Steph Curry's not as cold as anybody that's ever played. And he didn't come from that.
Right.
And you don't have to come from that. So how do you think that's changed as well?
I mean, I like that story as well, because we're not a monolith. There's a lot of different in our community, and I know they like to drum up the struggle part, but not everybody's struggling. You know what I mean? Like people are at different levels. People are at different economic levels, different everything like that. So I'm glad you're seeing a little bit more diversity as far as during draft nights and the stories and stuff like that, and just the visual of them at draft night with their families, and sometimes you see, oh, that's his son. They're like, okay, that's cool. Like a former player, like, you'll see him sitting there next to his son, and then the son just look just like him. And I think that's great. I love seeing that. But,
right. So when you were playing, right, and you were talking about how, the kids running up to you after the game and all that, what was that feeling of, I have all of these people watching me, but none of that really matters when my children, or I'm alone with my children just playing around. Like, what is that transition mentally for you, and how did that feel? How does that feel?
It's just what you said. Nothing else matters. Like, your kids can make you feel like you could have the worst game that you'd have ever had in your life.
Right.
And you come around and about to go into that family room or come around in the hallway, and your kids run and jump into your arms. Man, you ain't worried about that game. You know what I mean? It's just different. It just changes everything. And I experienced that. I remember Malcolm Little, just running around. You know what I mean? Right. Then as soon as he saw me, he stops and then runs over towards me. So you see that it's the greatest feeling. But the thing about it is, like I said, they never showed that with guys.
Yeah.
Because that was regular that you would see all the time with different guys. And you're in a way, we're traveling some different team, and you're seeing a guy that you just played against, and they're experiencing that with their children, and it's just a beautiful sight. But cameras never showed it. Never showed that.
That goes back to society and how we view black fathers anyway.
No question.
And so, like, that's just the picture that has been painted for so long, and it's never really been painted by the father themselves. It's like, that's why we doing this show. It's like, we have stories, we have information, we have things that need to be highlighted, shared, whether good, bad, indifferent.
Mhm.
But it's these stories that so many people can relate to, and so that's why I was like, okay, well, why not show that? Why not highlight fathers? Why not, especially highlight Black fathers?
Right.
And so, that's why we're doing this, and we want this out there. We want to help people. We want to say, like you said, you hit on it perfectly when you said we're not a monolith. That is 100% true. And so, we're going to touch the masses with
That's great.
information.
That's great. Things like this are so important. Like, I can't say it enough. I mean, because if you don't see something, you start to, people think it doesn't exist. And I was like, well, no, there's nothing that doesn't exist. You're just not being shown it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what it is.
So we're gonna start to get you up out of here. We're gonna get you these last couple of questions. We're gonna end with, what is it that you would give advice to a new parent if they're just now starting out and I have no idea what I'm stepping into? I was not raised with a father, so I don't know what a father really looks like. What advice would you give them?
Speak to elders.
That is
elders.
That's the first time we heard that, and that is a great piece of advice.
Man.
Oh my God, that's a great piece of advice.
Because my grandfather was breaking down different things to me, different mistakes that he made, different things that he learned, different things that he saw. I mean, we'd be sitting there for hours. That's what I would say. First and foremost, talk to elders.
That's great. That's a great answer.
Oh, yeah, we're definitely going to keep telling everybody, like, speak to the old people. So, all right, last question. You've done so much, like, throughout your career, throughout your life. But what do you ultimately want your legacy as a father to be?
What do I want my legacy as a father to be? I want my kids to just always remember the things that I spoke to them about and taught them, and never built myself. Because a lot of times I would use times where I made mistakes. I do what my grandfather did. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, I messed up. Then let me tell you what I did here. And then what I learned from it, so that you don't have to make that same mistake that I made. So I made this mistake. You don't make this mistake.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And I want that to really be ingrained in their head before they do so. Wait, my daddy told me about this. Nah, I ain't gonna go that direction. You know what I mean? That's what I really, when you hear that feedback, it's like, I can't even explain how, or the feeling that comes over you when, something that you've broken down to your children, you're understanding that it's sunk in. You know what I mean? Like, they heard you and then applied it to their life. Like, can't even explain.
Wow. Well, the information that you shared with us about the communication, the knowledge, the wisdom, and for you to take the time to share all that with us, man, we really, really, really appreciate you again. And we're very honored to even have you, sit down and talk to us, man. Thank you again.
No problem. Like I said, this is great work that y'all are doing. So, as soon as I looked y'all up and saw what y'all doing, I was like, oh, I'll definitely support that. So we need more, things like this. We need more, people that highlight fatherhood. And like you said, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we're not a monolith. So talk about all of it. There's a great group that I'm in, on Facebook called Black Fathers. And if you're not, part of that, just look it up. It's called Black Fathers. It started off as a small group, but then it grew to like thousands of people. And it's just all Black men talking about all different things that they're experiencing. Some good, some bad, some brag on their kids, some struggling with this, some do that. You know what I mean? Everybody doing something. It's a great group. And I always tell people about it, because you go in there and sometimes just like it's a safe place for men to be poured into. And then you see people having different issues, and you can actually comment on it and say, oh, I was dealing with something like this. Let me tell you. You know what I mean? So a lot of young fathers are coming in there like, hey, I don't know what to do with this. This is the situation that I got. And they got all these different men giving them different advice, like a village. So it's a beautiful thing. So Black Fathers, you should check it out.
Definitely.
I definitely like that. Definitely.
Well, again, we appreciate it. We're not going to take up too much more of your time. We out of here.
Thank you for watching another episode of Just My Baby Daddy podcast. I know you liked what you saw. So what I need for you to do is go back and look at past episodes. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share our YouTube page, Just My Baby Daddy Podcast. And you can follow us on all social media at Just My Baby Daddy Pod.